Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. J.K. Rowling's books captured the world's heart not just through thrilling plots, but also through unforgettable, vibrant characters. On the surface, it all seems clear. There are good guys and bad guys, and everyone behaves according to their side. But things aren't that simple. Sometimes the heroes make choices that in any other context we'd condemn. So let's get straight to it. Which of the good guys weren't as flawless as we thought? Number 1, the hypocrisy toward house elves. In the Goblet of Fire, Hermione passionately champions house elf rights, even founding SPEW. But her closest friends, Harry and Ron, mock the idea. They simply don't care. They're just elves, after all. But these are the same heroes who fight against the idea of magical superiority. So what does that mean? They oppose discrimination, but only when it affects them. Number 2, Lupin's attempt to run away. Remus Lupin, one of the most respected characters in the series, suddenly suggests abandoning his pregnant wife to join Harry and the others on their mission. It's not just odd, it's selfish. Even Harry, still a teenager, calls him out. And rightly so, the Lupin we knew as thoughtful and noble wasn't ready for the greatest challenge of all, becoming a father. Number 3, Cedric's silence. Cedric Diggory was a brave and honourable student, a good friend. But when Harry faced bullying and ridicule after being chosen for the Triwizard Tournament, Cedric knew what was going on and stayed silent. He didn't join the mockery, but he didn't stop it either, and sometimes doing nothing is still a choice. Number 4, Slughorn and his inner circle. Professor Slughorn was charming and clever, but his Slug Club was a networking tool, a private circle of students selected not for their character, but for their usefulness. He wasn't nurturing talent out of kindness. He was investing in future favours. A master of connections, yes, but hardly an ideal educator. Number 5, Molly Weasley and the power of gossip. Molly Weasley represents warmth and maternal care, but even she had her flaws. In Order of the Phoenix, she believed Rita Skeeter's gossip about a romantic relationship between Harry and Hermione. Instead of supporting Hermione, Molly sent her a tiny Easter egg, a clear, hurtful message. Compare that to the large, warm gift she sent Harry. It's petty, and it's unfair, and it shows how even the kindest can be influenced by lies. Number 6, Fred and George, mischief or malice? The Weasley twins were fan favourites, clever, funny, rebellious. But let's be honest, some of their pranks went too far. They terrified Ron with spiders, tested dangerous products on first years, and locked Montague in a vanishing cabinet. If they had been in Slytherin, would the staff have turned a blind eye? Probably not. But as Gryffindors, their actions were often excused. No one ever called it bullying. But that's what it was. Number 7, Harry's childhood and the adults who let it happen. Dumbledore placed Harry with the Dursleys for protection. But did no adult ever check how he was really living? Locked in a cupboard, starved, humiliated. And this went on for years. Where were Lupin, McGonagall, even Dumbledore himself? No visits, no concern, no one asked, "Are you okay?" How do we explain that? Number 8, Neville and his dangerous mistakes. Neville clutched the crumpled scrap of parchment, heart racing. He had written down Gryffindor's passwords, every single one. "I keep forgetting them," he admitted in Prisoner of Azkaban, cheeks red. But that scrap fell into the wrong hands. Sirius Black, believed to be a murderer, used it to enter the common room. He stood over Ron's bed with a knife in the dark. No one was harmed that night, but they could have been. Neville's carelessness wasn't harmless. It nearly ended in disaster. McGonagall's fury was swift. "I have never been so ashamed of a Gryffindor," she said, trembling with anger. Neville lost his privileges, but the deeper wound was trust. His forgetfulness wasn't cute that time. It was dangerous. And though we admire Neville for standing up to Voldemort, we cannot ignore the moments when his mistakes nearly brought others to harm. Bravery doesn't erase responsibility, and even heroes must be held accountable for the risks they take, even by accident. Number 9, Hagrid's reckless teaching. Hagrid beamed with pride as he led the class toward a paddock, introducing Buckbeak, a proud hippogriff. "You've got to bow first," he said, eyes shining. But Draco Malfoy, arrogant and dismissive, insulted the creature. In seconds, Buckbeak struck. Malfoy fell screaming. Panic followed. In Prisoner of Azkaban, that lesson nearly ended in catastrophe. Hagrid meant well. But bringing a dangerous beast to a class of 13-year-olds without proper precautions? That wasn't kindness. That was negligence. Even Hagrid admitted later, voice trembling, "I should have known better." And then there was Grawp, Hagrid's half-brother, a giant, hidden deep in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid brought him back from the mountains and chained him in secret, hoping to teach him manners. "He's just lonely," Hagrid explained. But Grawp roared and thrashed, barely controllable. He terrified even Hagrid. Still he left him near the school, close to children, not out of malice, but blind affection. Hagrid's heart was huge, but sometimes that heart ignored the real danger he put others in. Number 10. James Potter's bullying of Snape. The sun was bright that day by the Black Lake, but the memory was sharp and dark. James Potter stood with a wand pointed at Severus Snape, laughing. "Snivelus," he said, flipping Snape upside down with a flick. Robes fell. The crowd of students jeered. Sirius Black grinned beside him, and Lily Evans watched in horror. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry watched this moment unfold in the Pensieve. What he saw wasn't heroism. It was humiliation. Bullying, plain and cruel. James didn't stop. "I'm bored," he said, twirling his wand like a toy. Snape tried to fight back. He was no victim without flaws. His bitterness ran deep even then. But James didn't care. He wanted attention, applause, control. "Leave him alone," Lily shouted, but even her voice didn't break the spell. James only relented when she threatened to walk away. That wasn't bravery. That was arrogance. Harry's world tilted after that memory. He had always believed in his father as a noble figure, but what he saw shook him. He was as bad as Snape, Harry admitted, stunned. The Marauders, James, Sirius, Remus, Peter, were legends, but they were also teenage boys, drunk on power and popularity. And in that moment, James chose cruelty over character. That truth rarely surfaces in fan praise. James grew, he matured, he fought for good and died protecting his family. But that lakeside scene lingers. It reminds us that even heroes can have shadows. And sometimes those shadows fall on others in ways that last a lifetime. For Snape, it never ended. And for readers, it forces a question. Do we forgive James because he changed, or because we want to believe our heroes were always good? Number 11. Ron's jealousy. Toward Harry. The goblet flared blue. Harry's name flew into the air like a spark. Silence followed. And then Ron turned away. No questions, no support, just cold distance. "You want to be alone with your fan club," Ron muttered later, refusing to meet Harry's eyes. For weeks he ignored his best friend. Harry hadn't entered the tournament willingly, but Ron, blinded by jealousy, saw only fame. In Goblet of Fire their friendship cracked under the weight of Ron's own insecurity. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. In Deathly Hallows, under the influence of the Horcrux, Ron's resentment boiled over again. "You think I don't know how this feels?" he shouted. "You're nothing special. You've never felt this." Then he walked out, leaving Harry and Hermione in the middle of a war. The Horcrux amplified his feelings, but it didn't create them. The jealousy had always been there, buried under years of playing second to the chosen one. Even small moments revealed the cracks. In Half-Blood Prince, when Harry outperformed him at Quidditch tryouts, Ron was furious. Only Hermione's charm, an invisible push of confidence, helped him believe in himself. Ron struggled not because Harry overshadowed him, but because he feared he'd never shine on his own. That fear twisted into quiet envy, and envy turned into silence, sarcasm, and sudden distance. Ron was loyal, yes, he was brave and kind, but he was also human, flawed, uncertain, and deeply affected by being constantly compared. His journey wasn't just about defeating dark wizards, it was about defeating doubt, and while his loyalty eventually triumphed, the scars of envy remind us that even the best of friends can falter. Number 12. Hermione's manipulations. The parchment glowed faintly as Marietta Edgecombe lowered her hood. Her betrayal had been swift. She revealed the existence of Dumbledore's army to Umbridge, hoping for reward. But Hermione had been ready. "You might have noticed," Hermione said calmly, "that she's got a rather lovely formation of pimples across her face." The word sneak burned into Marietta's skin like a scarlet brand. It wasn't a prank, it was a curse designed to punish, to shame, to mark her permanently. There was no trial, no mercy, just Hermione's justice, preemptively and painfully delivered. That wasn't an isolated moment. Hermione Granger, the voice of reason and defender of the oppressed, often chose control over trust. Before leaving for the Horcrux hunt, she erased her parents' memories, made them believe they were different people, sent them to Australia. "I've also modified my parents' memories," she told Harry, her voice steady. "They think they're called Wendell and Monica Wilkins." It was a noble act, perhaps, but also terrifying. She rewrote their lives without consent, took away everything they were to protect a future they never agreed to fight for. She was always the planner, the one who saw further than anyone else. But her need to control outcomes sometimes blurred the line between cleverness and coldness. She planted the fake galleons with protean charms to alert Dumbledore's army of meetings, a brilliant invention, but also a method of surveillance. Everyone was linked, everyone was traceable. Hermione didn't ask. She acted. She believed in what was right, even if it meant crossing into what was wrong. Her brilliance was never in doubt, her courage unquestionable. But the path she chose was paved with silent sacrifices, not only her own, but those of others. Hermione Granger was a hero, but not a gentle one. Behind every careful plan was a sharp edge, honed by fear and certainty. Number 13. Dumbledore's manipulation of Harry. Harry stood in the headmaster's office, staring at the pensive. His hands trembled. He had just watched the memory, Snape's tears, the Doe Patronus, and then Dumbledore's voice. "You must be the one to kill him, Harry. It must be you." The boy who lived was never meant to survive. From the very beginning, Dumbledore knew the truth. That part of Voldemort's soul lived inside Harry. That to destroy the Dark Lord, Harry had to die, yet he told him nothing, not in first year, not in fifth, not even as the war began to tear their world apart. Dumbledore let Harry walk through fire again and again, the Philosopher's Stone, the Chamber of Secrets, the Triwizard Tournament. Each time he watched from above, always keeping his secrets. "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth," he finally admitted in Deathly Hallows. But that wasn't enough. He withheld vital knowledge, manipulated Harry's path, all while playing the role of kind mentor. He wasn't a villain, but he wasn't innocent either. Even in death, Dumbledore pulled the strings. The resurrection stone hidden in the snitch, the wand passed by defeat, the portrait that offered cryptic advice. He turned Harry's life into a chessboard, moving him toward sacrifice with a gentle smile and twinkling eyes. "I have planned this for a long time," he told Snape. And Harry? He was the final piece, brave, trusting, and entirely unaware that he was walking to his death. When Harry entered the Forbidden Forest, knowing he would die, he did so because he believed in Dumbledore. That belief gave him strength, but it was built on a carefully crafted lie. Dumbledore gave Harry no choice, only one path, one ending. For all his wisdom and power, Albus gambled with a child's life. And that truth lingers in the shadows of every victory. Number 14. Sirius Black's treatment of Kreacher. Sirius Black slammed the cupboard door shut, his voice cold. "Get out, Kreacher," he snapped, eyes blazing with disgust. The old house elf bowed stiffly and shuffled away, muttering under his breath. Kreacher had lived in Grimmauld Place longer than Sirius had been alive, but to Sirius he was just another relic of a past he hated. His treatment of the elf was filled with open contempt. "He's foul," Sirius said in Order of the Phoenix, "but he's been with the family for years. He's been trained to hate people like you, Ron and Hermione, and me, I suppose." There was no attempt at kindness, no effort to redeem him, just hatred. The irony was cruel. Sirius, a prisoner of his own childhood, turned into a captor himself. He hated the Black family's obsession with blood purity, yet treated Kreacher like filth, just as his parents once treated others. Kreacher's ramblings, his stubborn loyalty to Walburga Black, were signs of deep indoctrination. But instead of breaking the cycle, Sirius fed it. He insulted Kreacher, ignored him, shouted him out of rooms. In doing so, he repeated the cruelty he despised, unknowingly creating a silent enemy within his own home. When Kreacher betrayed Sirius to Bellatrix Lestrange, it wasn't a twist of fate, it was a consequence. Kreacher had obeyed orders. He left the house because Sirius told him to get out. Dobby once said, "Dobby has heard of your greatness, sir, but of your goodness Dobby never knew." The same could be said for Sirius. Great in name, brave in battle, but blind to the wounds he caused in others. Kreacher's act of betrayal didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of scorn, culminating in one fatal moment. Later, in Deathly Hallows, Harry learned to show Kreacher respect. He offered kindness. And Kreacher changed. He began to fight for them, not against them. That shift proved something Sirius never learned. Respect could heal what hatred broke. Had Sirius offered just a trace of that, perhaps the door wouldn't have closed on him forever. Number 15. McGonagall's bias against other houses. It was the first week of Harry Potter's very first year at Hogwarts when Minerva McGonagall spotted his natural talent for flying and, breaking every known protocol, arranged for him to join the Gryffindor Quidditch team despite him never having attended a single flying lesson. "You must be a natural," she said, eyes glittering with uncharacteristic excitement. But this wasn't just admiration for raw talent. It was the beginning of a long pattern of partiality, a professor's silent contract with her house, signed not in ink but in actions. And though McGonagall is lauded as just and fair, this gesture to Harry Potter was the first of many that exposed a deep, if quiet, bias for Gryffindor. Let us not forget the scene in Philosopher's Stone when Harry, Ron, and Hermione ventured out after curfew, defied school rules, and discovered the troll in the dungeon. While their bravery in saving Hermione was admirable, it remains a fact that they broke the rules, something McGonagall herself acknowledged. "What on earth were you thinking of?" she snapped. "You're lucky you weren't killed." And yet, rather than punishing them harshly, she awarded Gryffindor 5 points, for sheer dumb luck, it seemed. Would she have done the same had it been, say, Draco Malfoy and Pansy Parkinson? Highly unlikely. When Draco, in an effort to catch Harry in a rule-breaking act, was himself caught wandering the castle, he received detention. The message was clear. Breaking rules was heroic if you were in Gryffindor, and disgraceful if you were not. The same inconsistency emerged during the infamous Norbert incident. When Harry and Hermione were caught out of bed after hours delivering Hagrid's dragon to the astronomy tower, McGonagall was furious, not necessarily for the rule-breaking, but because she thought they had fabricated the story of the dragon to get Malfoy into trouble. She deducted 50 points from each, an enormous blow to Gryffindor, but curiously, this punishment didn't last. Later, as Gryffindor was magically awarded house points at the end-of-year feast, it wasn't the actual academic or sporting achievements that secured them the House Cup, but last-minute points from Dumbledore, and let's be honest, likely coordinated with McGonagall's approval for acts that included blatant rule violations. McGonagall may not have orchestrated the end-of-year coup in full, but she never once stood against it. She did not object when Neville Longbottom was awarded 10 points for standing up to his friends, points that tipped the House Cup in Gryffindor's favour. As noble as Neville's courage may have been, was that moment truly equal in magnitude to the achievements of other students across other houses? Students like Cedric Diggory of Hufflepuff, who led his house with quiet dignity, or Penelope Clearwater of Ravenclaw, who kept perfect marks and discipline throughout the year. They received no such glorious recognition. A particularly telling example comes from Chamber of Secrets. When the school was gripped with terror over the attacks on Muggle-born students, and suspicion hung heavily over Harry, McGonagall stood cold and silent. But once Harry and Ron reappeared from the chamber, again having broken 100 rules and risked their lives, she did not scold them. She praised them. "You will both receive special awards for services to the school," she declared. The hypocrisy lay not in the recognition of their courage, but in the absence of consequences for their repeated defiance of school authority. Would she have smiled had Blaise Zabini disappeared for hours without explanation, only to return with a wild story of serpents and secret chambers? Her treatment of other houses, particularly Slytherin, remained markedly harsher. Take the time in Prisoner of Azkaban when Draco Malfoy faked an injury to escape a class with hippogriffs. While his cowardice was obvious, McGonagall dismissed his fear as mere manipulation. "That boy," she scoffed, "is an attention-seeking little—" But when Hermione slapped Draco for insulting Hagrid, McGonagall simply ignored the transgression. No detention, no reprimand. Violence, it appeared, was acceptable when it came from a Gryffindor, especially when directed at a Slytherin. Even within her own classes, the bias was palpable. During Transfiguration lessons, McGonagall showed clear patience with Neville Longbottom's many mishaps. She encouraged him, guided him, and never failed to reassure him. "It takes time, Mr. Longbottom," she would say with a nod. But when Theodore Nott or Millicent Bulstrode stumbled, she was far more curt, less forgiving. Mistakes from Gryffindor were framed as opportunities for growth. Mistakes from Slytherin were signs of inadequacy. Perhaps the most blatant incident occurred during the Triwizard Tournament in Goblet of Fire. When Harry's name emerged from the goblet, McGonagall, instead of expressing doubt or suspicion, immediately leapt to his defence. "He's not of age," she argued passionately. Her concern, though seemingly fair, was laced with a motherly protectiveness she never extended to students outside Gryffindor. When Cedric Diggory, Hufflepuff's rightful champion, prepared for the challenges with discipline and fairness, McGonagall rarely praised his efforts. Her admiration for Cedric was stiff and professional, unlike the affection she openly displayed toward Harry, even as he flouted rules and challenged authority. And it wasn't just Harry. Ron Weasley, whose academic mediocrity was well known, was consistently treated with leniency. When he insulted other students or fell asleep in class, McGonagall's responses were always dry but gentle. Contrast this with her harsh treatment of Zacharias Smith, a Hufflepuff who voiced skepticism during Dumbledore's army meetings in Order of the Phoenix. Smith's concerns were valid, yet McGonagall, rather than encourage open dialogue, seemed to treat him with barely concealed disdain. The preferential treatment extended even to Hermione Granger, although she was certainly deserving of praise for her intellect. When she brewed Polyjuice Potion illegally in Chamber of Secrets, used a time-turner to attend multiple classes without full permission in Prisoner of Azkaban, and created enchanted coins to organize an underground rebellion in Order of the Phoenix, McGonagall turned a blind eye. Any other student, especially one from Slytherin, would have been expelled for a fraction of these offences. Number 16, Ginny Weasley's aggressive behaviour. Ginny Weasley, the youngest of the 7 red-haired children of the Burrow, is often praised as a fierce, confident, and loyal companion, particularly in her role as the eventual love interest and wife of Harry Potter. From the moment she shed her shy demeanour, Ginny's character was celebrated as the epitome of growth, the quiet girl who bloomed into a strong witch capable of holding her own in the battlefield of life and war. And yet, buried beneath this admiration is a subtler, rarely acknowledged truth. Ginny Weasley had a temper, and sometimes she was cruel. One of the most striking incidents occurs in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Ginny unleashes the Bat-Bogey Hex on Zacharias Smith, a fellow student who had merely been irritating during a Dumbledore's army meeting. The Bat-Bogey Hex is not a light spell. It causes a person's bogies to enlarge, take the shape of bats, and attack them. When it's described in the books, it's not with whimsy, but with awe. As the text states, Ginny was the only one who ever managed to get a Bat-Bogey Hex to work properly. Even Fred and George were impressed. That Fred and George, known for their own questionable pranks, were impressed by the violence of her hex, should serve as a warning rather than a badge of honour. Zacharias Smith, for all his faults, he was sarcastic and often questioned Harry's choices, was still a student, still a peer. His biggest crime was asking too many questions, and for that he was assaulted magically in front of his classmates. What's more telling is the way the narrative allows Ginny to walk away from this unscathed, unchallenged, even celebrated. There is a sense in the book that the attack was deserved, even comedic. But for a moment, step outside the narrative's favoritism. Imagine any other character, perhaps Draco Malfoy or Pansy Parkinson, hexing a fellow student out of sheer annoyance. Would the scene have felt the same? Ginny's temper is not isolated to this one spell. Throughout the series, she's shown a pattern of acting out violently, especially when her pride or sense of loyalty is pricked. In Order of the Phoenix, when Michael Corner sulks over Gryffindor winning the Quidditch Cup, Ginny doesn't attempt diplomacy or understanding. Instead, she ditched him, as Ron tells it, and within a chapter, she's snogging Dean Thomas. While this might seem like an act of independence, and it is, it also reflects her impulsive, sometimes spiteful approach to relationships. Later, in Half-Blood Prince, when Ron chastises her for kissing Dean in public, her retort is sharp and unforgiving. "So what?" she snaps. "I heard you the other night snogging Lavender Brown, and it sounded like a rather wet one." Her words are designed to humiliate Ron, not just stand her ground. She doesn't argue with logic or maturity, she attacks with venom. The exchange may be amusing, but beneath it lies a consistent theme. Ginny doesn't merely defend herself, she strikes back to wound. And then there's her treatment of Fleur Delacour. In Half-Blood Prince, Ginny joins her mother in mocking Fleur, calling her Phlegm. The nickname is childish and derogatory, and yet Ginny repeats it freely in front of others. While Mrs. Weasley's disapproval of Fleur stems from maternal concern, Ginny's ridicule feels petty, especially considering Fleur had done nothing to harm her. In fact, Fleur's only real flaw was being confident and beautiful, traits that Ginny herself is later praised for. The double standard is glaring. When Fleur eventually proves her love for Bill Weasley, Ginny's mockery ceases, but never once does she apologize or reflect on her behavior. Even Luna Lovegood, the kind and ethereal Ravenclaw, isn't entirely safe from Ginny's sharp tongue. Though Ginny does befriend Luna and defend her at times, there's an undertone of superiority in their relationship. In Order of the Phoenix, when Luna is dismissed as Loony Lovegood by her classmates, Ginny steps in, not with empathy, but with aggression. She threatens the students and later says, "She's nice, Luna, she just says weird stuff sometimes." There's a clear divide. Ginny is normal, Luna is weird, and Ginny doesn't hesitate to reinforce that, even while pretending to defend her. When looking at Ginny's actions in the context of the war, her ferocity becomes more understandable. She's been through trauma. She was possessed by Tom Riddle in her first year, a terrifying experience that left her emotionally scarred. She fought in the Battle of Hogwarts, lost friends, and lived under the thumb of the Carrows during the final year at Hogwarts. These events hardened her, but trauma doesn't always justify cruelty. Many students suffered, and yet not all of them wielded hexes like weapons of pride. It's also important to examine how Ginny's behavior is framed compared to male characters. When Harry lashes out in Order of the Phoenix, he's called unstable and dangerous. When Snape punishes students, he's painted as a sadist. But when Ginny hexes someone or verbally cuts them down, it's often played for laughs or seen as empowerment. The double standard is clear, and it shields her from necessary scrutiny. The way other characters react to Ginny's behavior also reveals how much the narrative protects her. Ron, for instance, scolds her once for dating boys, but never for her spells or her cruelty. Harry, enamored by her confidence, sees her temper as a positive trait. "She's tough," he says admiringly. Hermione, the ever-observant moral compass of the group, never criticizes Ginny's behavior, perhaps because Ginny is firmly entrenched in the inner circle, or perhaps because the narrative simply doesn't allow it. Interestingly, Ginny's bat bogey hex became a running joke, even outside the books. In interviews, J.K. Rowling spoke of it with amusement, saying it helped establish Ginny's prowess as a witch. But is it humorous to cause another student such discomfort? If a teacher had cast such a spell on a student, would it still be funny? Take another moment from Deathly Hallows when Ginny joins in the heist to steal the sword of Gryffindor from Snape's office. It's a daring act, certainly, but it also places other students in danger. Her bravery is never questioned, only celebrated. Yet we must ask, what drives this bravery? Is it a noble desire to fight for justice, or a recklessness that disregards consequence? Even her Quidditch matches reflect this aggressiveness. Ginny flies like a storm, fierce and unrelenting. Her sportsmanship is admirable, but there are hints of something darker, a need to dominate, to win at all costs. It's not just about playing, it's about crushing the opposition. She's not unlike her brothers in this way, but while Fred and George are known pranksters, Ginny's edge has bite. Number 17, Arthur Weasley's carelessness at work. Arthur Weasley always wore the same expression, a mixture of gentle curiosity and childlike wonder. To the outsider, he was a charming oddball, a man devoted to understanding the Muggle world with a passion so pure it made him instantly likable. But under the surface of his cluttered office in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, something more troubling lingered. A pattern of leniency, bias, and professional negligence that, had it been discovered in someone less beloved, would have led to disciplinary hearings or worse. There's no denying Arthur's warmth. He adored his children, stood firmly against Voldemort, and risked his life for the Order of the Phoenix. But it is precisely this reputation that helped obscure a long history of bending the rules when it suited his personal interests. After all, Arthur wasn't just mildly interested in Muggle artifacts. He actively collected and enchanted them, transforming ordinary Muggle items into magical contraptions, many of which would have been illegal by the very laws he was paid to enforce. Take the infamous incident of the Ford Anglia, a car so heavily enchanted that it not only could fly but also become invisible and defy gravity. Arthur was fully aware this was against the decree for the restriction of magical artifacts. And yet, when Ron and Harry crashed it into the Whomping Willow, he didn't scold his son for using a dangerous illegal magical vehicle. Instead, he exclaimed, "Did you really? Did it go all right? I mean, that was very wrong, boys, very wrong indeed," barely containing his excitement. Molly Weasley had to be the one to issue a proper reprimand. It was as if, for Arthur, the thrill of magical experimentation outweighed his duty as a ministry employee. The irony is sharp. Arthur headed a department responsible for identifying and penalizing individuals who enchanted Muggle objects in dangerous ways. Yet his own home was practically a museum of violations. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the Weasleys' attic holds a biting doorknob, a raincoat that shrieks, and a toaster that sings. But worst of all, these items were hidden in plain sight, without any proper safeguards or magical containment. If any other wizard had such a collection, say Mundungus Fletcher, or even a less fortunate ministry clerk, they'd be fined or imprisoned. But Arthur was untouchable, his charm acting as a cloak for misconduct. And no one dared call it what it was: abuse of his position, plain and simple. His colleagues must have noticed. Perkins, his co-worker, spent most of his time helping Arthur track dangerous magical items. But Perkins never seemed to report Arthur's own activities. Was it loyalty, fear, or just resignation to a system that was all too forgiving of certain types of rule-breaking? We must also examine the way Arthur's actions sometimes endangered others. The flying car incident, for instance, not only broke multiple laws, but also risked exposing the wizarding world. Muggles saw the car. It flew in broad daylight. The damage to the Whomping Willow alone could have sparked internal investigations. And what was Arthur's response? He worried more about an inquiry from the ministry than about the safety of the children who used it. "If the ministry gets wind of this, I'm in trouble," he muttered. "Not we, but I." A telling distinction. Even his attempts at regulation were half-hearted. In Goblet of Fire, we see Arthur participating in the raid on Barty Crouch Jr.'s house, where they find an illegally enchanted dustbin. But rather than treat the issue with due seriousness, Arthur downplays it, talking about how amusing it was that the bin attacked a pair of Muggle police officers. He tells Harry, "We had to memory charm the lot of them. I had to use the big one, the one that makes them forget everything for hours. Poor devils." He wasn't horrified that a magical object hurt innocent people. He was amused. This casual disregard for Muggle safety should have been a red flag, particularly for someone who claimed to love and respect Muggles. Love without responsibility is indulgence. Arthur's obsession was often self-serving, not born of a desire to protect or educate, but to tinker and collect. The same contradictions appear when Arthur faces clear violations by others. When Lucius Malfoy slips Tom Riddle's diary into Ginny's cauldron, Arthur is rightly furious, but he doesn't pursue the matter further. He doesn't report Malfoy or initiate a ministry inquiry. Why? Because Arthur Weasley, for all his good intentions, had a long-standing habit of allowing personal biases to cloud professional judgment. He hated the Malfoys, yes, but he hated bureaucracy more, and so, once again, he let the system slide into silence. His office was notorious for its lack of oversight. Kingsley Shacklebolt, known for his efficiency and moral backbone, was often heard to comment, off the record, that certain departments of the ministry were more for show than actual enforcement. The misuse of Muggle artifacts office fell squarely in that category, and Arthur's leadership, or lack thereof, was a large part of the reason. When Umbridge began enforcing stricter rules at the ministry, she bypassed Arthur's department entirely. Even a figure as odious as Dolores Umbridge saw that Arthur's methods were unreliable. She called his office a broom closet full of cracked teacups, dismissing it with cruel accuracy. And while her tactics were abominable, the truth of her words still echoes. Arthur had allowed his department to become a joke. Let's not forget the underground business Arthur's own sons ran while still in school. Fred and George Weasley's joke products, many of which blurred the lines between harmless pranks and dangerous magical tampering, were inspired by the very culture Arthur fostered at home. When your father brings home enchanted plugs and explodes kettles for fun, the lesson isn't about responsibility. It's about how far you can push before someone says enough. Even Molly, the ever-watchful matriarch, seemed resigned to Arthur's carelessness. "Arthur, you'll get us all in trouble," she often warned. Yet her voice, however loud in the moment, never translated into real consequences. The family lived under the umbrella of affection, one that shielded them from the scrutiny others would have endured. Number 18, Hermione's spell on Xenophilius. It happened quickly and without hesitation. Xenophilius Lovegood, eyes wide and filled with the desperate panic of a father, had just made the gravest of decisions. He stood there in his tattered robes, hands trembling, his eccentric demeanour now twisted with guilt and fear. Hermione Granger, barely 17, recognized that fear at once. She did not have time to debate morality. There was no round-table discussion, no pause for democratic deliberation. She raised her wand. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Chapter 20, the Golden Trio visits the home of Xenophilius Lovegood to learn more about the strange symbol that keeps appearing in their search for Horcruxes. They are tired, on the run, and increasingly wary of whom to trust. Xenophilius, publisher of The Quibbler, appears hospitable, offering tea, answering questions, and reminiscing about his daughter Luna, but underneath that calm is a man broken by grief and fear. Luna is missing, taken by the Death Eaters. And as it becomes clear to him that the trio knows nothing that could help get her back, he makes a choice that tilts the moral compass of the scene into murky waters. He betrays them. "I have to save her. She's all I've got," he mutters. Then, with shaking hands, he attempts to summon the Ministry to his home, knowing full well what that would mean for Harry, Ron, and Hermione. He is a father who has chosen treachery, but not out of malice. His betrayal is soaked in the desperation of a man who believes he has no other path. The response is swift and violent. As the Ministry's snatchers arrive, Hermione acts. She conjures an explosion, her spell splinters the home, throws debris across the hillside, and breaks the walls of the eccentric, spiraling Lovegood Tower. And that's not all. She places a memory charm on the snatchers themselves to protect their identities. She doesn't try to reason with Xenophilius or talk him down. She neutralizes him entirely. Here we must ask, was this the only way? Hermione Jean Granger is widely regarded as the moral compass of the trio, logical, cautious, and often the one to hold Harry and Ron back from reckless decisions. But in this moment, she does not hesitate. Her actions are calculated, immediate, and unrelenting. "Accio cloak, protego stupefy!" Her voice cuts through the chaos like a blade. In a matter of seconds, Xenophilius is subdued and the house destroyed. There's something deeply unsettling in how calmly she performs these acts. One cannot forget that Xenophilius is not a Death Eater. He is not even a supporter of the Ministry. He is a desperate man, a grieving father, a version of Molly Weasley if the Death Eaters had taken Ginny. Would Hermione have done the same if Molly betrayed them for her daughter? Hermione's magical violence is coldly effective. She does not relish it, nor does she express regret afterward. There is no pause as they disapparate into the forest, no self-reflection recorded in the text. That silence from her is loud. Rowling writes, "Hermione was white-faced and trembling, but her voice was steady." The trembling may suggest emotional stress, but the steadiness tells another story. Hermione had rehearsed this kind of choice, and perhaps, deep down, she always knew that war would demand such responses. The ethical dilemma is not simple. Xenophilius was going to hand them over to the Ministry. That much is true. And in doing so, he would have contributed to Harry's possible death. His actions were dangerous, even if they stemmed from love. But does that justify Hermione's scorched earth response? It's important to remember that Hermione's relationship with magic evolved dramatically over the course of the series. In Philosopher's Stone, she feared expulsion more than death. By Deathly Hallows, she is performing illegal memory charms using the Cruciatus curse and modifying time with a fluidity that shows a complete abandonment of magical restraint. The Lovegood incident isn't isolated. There is a precedent. Consider the memory charm she placed on her own parents. Before leaving for the Horcrux hunt, Hermione erased all traces of herself from their lives. Names, photographs, even their identities. She renamed them Wendell and Monica Wilkins and implanted a desire to move to Australia. She did not ask their permission. She made the choice herself. I've also modified my parents' memories so that they're convinced they're really called Wendell and Monica Wilkins, she tells Harry and Ron. The act was born of love, but also of control. Hermione has no qualms about manipulating reality if she believes the stakes demand it. Back to the Lovegoods. Xenophilius's betrayal is heartbreaking, not malicious. He is a man drowning, reaching for whatever log floats by. That log, unfortunately, is the Ministry. In a twisted way, he's not unlike Dobby in Chamber of Secrets, trying to hurt in order to protect. But Hermione doesn't offer him redemption. The fact that she destroyed his home is symbolic. The Lovegood house, a place of chaotic wisdom and open-mindedness, is obliterated in an instant. Its destruction feels like a metaphor for the loss of innocence, of magical eccentricity being crushed under the weight of war. Hermione, a Muggle-born, standing in a half-pagan tower of magical freedom, razes it to the ground to preserve the mission. It is easy to sympathize with Hermione. She is 17, fighting a war, under constant threat, and responsible not just for her own survival, but for the survival of Harry, the chosen one. In that pressure cooker, choices become brutal, but the point here is not to condemn her, it is to ask how deeply this war changed her, and whether it's possible that she changed too much. Did she ever reflect on what she did? We never hear of Hermione visiting Xenophilius after the war. We never see her apologize or help rebuild. Luna Lovegood, so often brushed aside as loony, suffers the most from that encounter. Her father betrays her friends for her sake and is punished for it. She is left imprisoned. And when the battle is won and Hogwarts begins to heal, Hermione never looks back. In the chaos of the war's end, we are told of reconciliations. Draco nods to Harry. Creature leads the house elves, but Xenophilius is absent, the man who printed truth when no one else would. The Quibbler had published the real story, Luna says. Disappears from the narrative, his home destroyed, his spirit likely broken. Hermione's spell did more than collapse a tower, it collapsed a man, and yet, what were her options? Could she have reasoned with him? Maybe. But there was no time. That's always the excuse in war. There's no time to think, to feel, to debate. And so we applaud Hermione for her quick thinking, while ignoring the cost. Magic is not just light and sound. It leaves traces. The Death Eaters used unforgivable curses and were condemned. But how many memory charms can one perform before becoming morally compromised? It's not that Hermione becomes a villain. She doesn't. But she becomes something else, something less idealistic, more utilitarian. She becomes, in a sense, a general, making decisions not based on what is kind, but what is necessary. and she was often the first to act. Ron, who is more emotional, might have hesitated. Harry, so prone to empathy, might have tried to talk Xenophilius down, but Hermione saw the structure of events. She understood cause and effect. If Xenophilius succeeded, they were captured. If they were captured, Harry would die. Therefore she acted, but the fact that she was right doesn't erase the damage. That's the core of this reflection. Just because something works, just because a spell saves the day, doesn't mean it was the best choice. And Hermione made many such choices, from her enchanted handbag to the jinx she placed on the DA sign-up sheet in Order of the Phoenix. Remember Marietta's pimples? She has a history of using powerful, sometimes aggressive magic without consent. She's not cruel, but she is thorough, and perhaps, in the context of the wizarding world, that's more dangerous. By the end of the war, Hermione has performed almost every type of magic there is. She has lied, manipulated, tortured in Malfoy Manor. She mimics Bellatrix under Polyjuice Potion and uses threats, an erased memory. All without any official magical training beyond Hogwarts, no ministry clearance, no adult oversight, just instinct and necessity. And that should make us think. Hermione, the brightest witch of her age, did what needed to be done, but who defines what that is? Who decides where the line is? At what point does brilliance become blindness? The Lovegood chapter is a masterclass in moral ambiguity. It shows us a heroine in action, decisive, brave, and brilliant. And it shows us a girl capable of doing harm for what she believes is good. It is not a contradiction. It is war. But years later, if Hermione ever walks past a crumbled house in a valley and sees broken stones under moss, does she remember the moment? Does she see Xenophilius's eyes, wide, frightened, and full of love for his daughter, and wonder whether there might have been another way? Or does she, like the rest of us, move forward? And that is the question J.K. Rowling leaves hanging in the air, unsaid but heavy. What are heroes allowed to do in the name of victory? And what scars do they carry afterward? Number 19. Percy Weasley's betrayal. Of all the betrayals that take place throughout the Harry Potter saga, few sting quite like the one committed by Percy Weasley. It isn't the most violent or even the most visible, but it strikes deep because it comes from within the heart of the beloved Weasley family. Percy's decision to sever ties with his parents and siblings at a time when the world was spiraling into chaos is a cold, cutting reminder that betrayal doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes it comes wearing a prefect badge and a ministry-issued tie. When Percy first appears, he's the rule-following older brother, a bit pompous but never hateful. He's the head boy, the model student, the one his parents proudly brag about. Yet beneath the surface lies a quiet hunger for recognition, a desire not to be seen merely as one of the Weasleys, but as a man who made it on his own. That desire over the years grows into something poisonous. By the time Voldemort returns and Dumbledore stands against the Ministry, Percy makes a choice that will burn the bridge between him and his family. The breaking point comes in Order of the Phoenix. The Ministry of Magic, refusing to acknowledge Voldemort's return, launches a campaign of denial. Dumbledore becomes the enemy, and in this ideological war, Percy picks a side. "I was offered a position in the minister's own office," he tells his father coldly. "That's right, Arthur. Mr. Crouch always said I was due for promotion." The subtext is sharp. He doesn't just accept the ministry's lies, he rewards them with loyalty, even when it means turning his back on truth. It isn't simply that Percy believes the ministry, he also believes that his family, especially his father, is foolish for not doing the same. His letter to Ron is perhaps the cruelest piece of writing in the entire series. If you're asked, I'd advise you to say that you've noticed a distinct cooling of friendship between yourself and Harry Potter. That isn't just distancing, it's betrayal in ink. Percy urges Ron to abandon Harry, Dumbledore, and even his own judgment, all to curry favour with the authorities. For Molly and Arthur, the pain is immense. Their son doesn't just leave, he condemns them. Percy walks out of the burrow and for years does not look back. He doesn't attend family dinners, he doesn't send letters, he doesn't come home for Christmas. "We tried to change his mind," Molly whispers tearfully in Half-Blood Prince. "But he was so angry, he said dreadful things." Her voice trails off, broken. The image of Percy shutting the door on them lingers like smoke in a burned-out house. What makes Percy's betrayal more haunting is the timing. The world outside the burrow is crumbling. Voldemort's return brings disappearances, murders, and fear. The Weasleys, poor but proud, stand against the rising tide of darkness, as they always have. And yet, one of their own marches willingly into the very halls of corruption. The irony is bitter. Percy joins a government that's actively persecuting the people he once loved. In Deathly Hallows, Percy's absence is a gaping wound. Bill and Fleur's wedding goes on, but without Percy. The toast is raised, laughter echoes in the garden, but there's an empty seat at the table. "He could have been there," George says once, trying to smile. "But I suppose promotions don't take holidays." It's a joke, but no one laughs. The weight of his betrayal is heavy not only on his parents, but on his siblings. Fred and George, once quick to tease him, no longer speak of him at all. Ron tries not to care. Ginny pretends she never hears his name. Even when their lives are in danger, Percy does not come. Not during the fall of the Ministry, not when the Order of the Phoenix is reassembling, not when his own family becomes a target of Death Eaters. His silence is deafening, but the story does not end with silence. Redemption, when it comes, is not dramatic. It arrives in the shadow of war, in the trembling walls of Hogwarts. Percy walks back into their lives not with words, but with action. In the final battle, he appears in the Great Hall, dishevelled, pale, but there. He fights alongside his family. He finds Fred in the chaos. He grips his brother's shoulder. "Hello, Minister," Fred jokes, grinning. And for a heartbeat, they are brothers again. It is in that moment, only moments before Fred's death, that Percy begins to pay the price of his choices. When the wall collapses and Fred falls, Percy lets out a howl that is not just of grief but of guilt. He drops to his knees, cradling his brother's body, and something inside him breaks forever. Percy was shaking with silent fury, the book says. He seized a Death Eater by the throat, hurling him to the ground. It is not the polished ministry man who mourns Fred. It is the brother who was too late. What's striking is how easily Percy is welcomed back. After years of silence, condemnation, and abandonment, the Weasleys embrace him again. Molly, through tears, touches his face. Arthur grips his hand. The moment is tender, but also strange. In the real world, wounds like that don't heal so quickly. Families torn by betrayal rarely find such clean forgiveness. J.K. Rowling never gives us a full reconciliation scene. There is no long monologue from Percy, no letter of apology, no moment of reckoning. We are told he's back. We are shown that he fights, but the emotional repairs are implied, not explored. This, perhaps, is the only part of Percy's arc that feels too easy, too clean, because Percy's betrayal wasn't just ideological, it was personal. He turned away from people who had only ever loved him. He missed Ginny's birthdays, ignored George's jokes, called Arthur a fool, made Molly cry at the dinner table. Those are the betrayals that linger, not the public denouncements, but the silent absences. There's a strange realism in Percy's arc, despite the magical setting. Many readers have seen a Percy in their own lives, a family member who chose pride over love, ambition over kin. and many readers have longed perhaps for a reconciliation that never came. In that sense, Percy represents something tragically true, that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most. Still, his return matters. Not because it undoes the past, but because it shows that even the worst mistakes can be met with a chance, however fragile, for forgiveness. Percy holds Fred's body and weeps, and in that moment he is no longer the ambitious young man who wanted a name at the ministry. He is just a brother, a son, a Weasley. What makes Percy's story particularly painful is that he wasn't evil. He didn't support Voldemort. He didn't cast curses at his siblings or betray them to Death Eaters. He believed in the system and in his own success more than he believed in his family. And that, in some ways, is even worse, because it was a choice made in cold daylight, not under a spell, not under duress, just pride and fear. Dumbledore once told Harry, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are." Percy's choices showed a man who confused loyalty with obedience and power with purpose. But in the end, he also chose to return, to stand on the side of truth, and to suffer the consequences. Even years later, readers debate Percy's actions. Some defend him, claiming he was young, pressured, ambitious. Others can't forgive him. They point to the war, the silence, the letter to Ron. They say Percy chose status over blood. Perhaps both are right. Perhaps that's what makes his betrayal so human. It's messy, uncomfortable, and unresolved. In the tapestry of the Weasley family, Percy's thread is the one that frayed. It pulled away, unraveled, but it never fully snapped. And in the end it was rewoven, not seamlessly, but with effort and pain. His story reminds us that love can endure even when it is tested beyond recognition, and that sometimes the hardest part of coming home is not being forgiven, but forgiving yourself. And so Percy Weasley remains one of the most complicated figures in the series, not because he was evil, but because he wasn't. He was proud, he was wrong, and he was human. Number 20, Dumbledore and Ariana's death. Of all the shadows that trailed Albus Dumbledore through his long and illustrious life, none cast a gloom as deep as the tragedy of his sister, Ariana. Before he was the headmaster of Hogwarts, before he was known as the only wizard Voldemort ever feared, Albus was a bright, ambitious boy growing up in Godric's Hollow. But it was there, in that small village, that the chain of events began which would lead to the most painful wound of his soul, the death of Ariana Dumbledore. Ariana was 6 years old when her life changed forever. 3 Muggle boys saw her performing magic, uncontrolled, spontaneous magic, the kind that young witches and wizards often exhibit before receiving any training. But instead of being fascinated, the boys reacted with fear and violence. As Aberforth Dumbledore later recalled, they got a bit scared, saw her doing magic, and they beat her up. The attack left Ariana deeply traumatized. She never recovered. Her magic turned inward, repressed and unstable, building pressure inside her like a ticking bomb. The sweet, bright child she had been vanished, replaced by a girl haunted by fear and prone to dangerous outbursts. Kendra Dumbledore, the children's mother, uprooted the family from Mold on the Wold and moved them to Godric's Hollow, determined to hide Ariana's condition from the world. In a society where magical instability could lead to institutionalization at places like St. Mungo's or worse, secrecy was survival. "My mother was always so afraid someone would find out about Ariana," Aberforth said bitterly. "She thought people would see her as a freak." And so Ariana lived in seclusion, shut away from the world, denied any formal magical education, denied companionship, denied even a future. Her life was sacrificed for the sake of the family's reputation and safety. Albus, meanwhile, flourished. He excelled at Hogwarts, dazzling his professors with his intellect, skill and charm. He won every academic prize there was to win, and by the time he graduated, he was already spoken of in awe. His talents promised greatness, but fate is cruel. And just as he was preparing to leave for a tour of the world with his friend Elphias Doge, tragedy struck again. Kendra was killed during one of Ariana's magical episodes. It was an accident, Aberforth insisted. She got angry and lost control, and that was it. Suddenly the burden of caring for Ariana fell not on Aberforth, who was still in school, but on the prodigy, Albus. For Albus Dumbledore, this was the beginning of a slow unravelling. He returned home, bitter and resentful. He felt his brilliance shackled by family duty. "I was gifted, I was brilliant," he later confessed to Harry in the limbo of King's Cross. "I wanted to escape, I wanted to shine." And that was when Gellert Grindelwald appeared in his life. Brilliant, charming, and radical, Grindelwald was everything Albus had dreamed of, an equal, a visionary, a friend, perhaps even something more. Together they spun dreams of revolution, a world where wizards ruled over muggles for the greater good, where those like Ariana would no longer have to live in hiding. But these dreams came at a cost. While the two young men theorized about power and dominance, Ariana was left neglected, an afterthought. Aberforth, always more grounded than his brother, saw through it. He was never free while Ariana lived, Aberforth said. He wanted to be free, to go with Grindelwald, to make a new world, a better world, but Ariana stood in the way. Tensions escalated until finally Aberforth confronted them. The three young men, Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald, argued bitterly. It ended in a duel, wild and furious, and somewhere in the chaos a spell struck Ariana. No one knew whose curse had hit her. Grindelwald fled immediately. Albus was devastated. "I don't know which of us cast the spell that killed her," he admitted. "Could have been any of us." The guilt of that moment would never leave him. It rooted deep in his soul, blooming into self-doubt, self-hatred, and a lifelong fear of power. He would go on to defeat Grindelwald years later, but by then the cost had already been paid. The tragedy of Ariana Dumbledore is not just the story of a magical accident. It is the story of how ambition, even noble ambition, can destroy what matters most. Albus had dreams of changing the world, but in chasing those dreams, he overlooked his own sister's suffering. He chose revolution over responsibility, ideology over intimacy, and in doing so he lost the only family member who had no voice, no freedom, and no protection. Aberforth never forgave him. "You don't get it, do you, Potter?" he once snapped. "He's not infallible, he's not God. He cared more about the world than he did about his own sister." And perhaps Aberforth was right. Even in death, Ariana's story remained hidden, shameful. Dumbledore, for all his wisdom and accomplishments, never publicly acknowledged her. It was only in his final conversation with Harry, beyond life, that he laid himself bare. "I was selfish," he confessed. "I loved Gellert Grindelwald more than I should have, and Ariana paid the price." There is something profoundly human in Dumbledore's failure. He was not evil. He was not heartless. He loved his sister. But he was young and arrogant and convinced that his ideas could save the world. He believed that a new magical order could prevent the pain Ariana had endured. And yet, in dreaming of saving others, he could not save the one closest to him. This is the cruel irony of idealism untempered by compassion. In many ways, the ghost of Ariana haunted all of Dumbledore's decisions. He refused the post of Minister for Magic. He became the guardian of Hogwarts, a place he could control, protect, and influence without descending into the temptations of politics and domination. He took troubled students under his wing, Tom Riddle, Harry Potter, always hoping, perhaps, that guiding them would redeem his past mistakes. But some damage cannot be undone. "Do not pity the dead, Harry," he said. "Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." It is hard not to hear in those words the echo of his guilt. The statue of Ariana in the Hogshead passage is not just a hidden entrance. It is a monument to the girl who never had a childhood. It stands still and silent while others pass through, never knowing her pain. Harry, upon learning the truth, was shaken. He had idolized Dumbledore, believed in his perfection. But like all heroes, Dumbledore had clay feet, and Ariana's death was the crack that ran deepest. And yet Dumbledore never stopped atoning. His quest for the Deathly Hallows, especially the Resurrection Stone, was not just a quest for power. "I was afraid," he told Harry, "that if I had the stone I could see her again, apologize, ask for her forgiveness. But it was a temptation too great. The stone, the wand, the cloak, they symbolized the mastery he had once craved. But in the end, he realized that true power lay not in dominion, but in humility. There's a heartbreaking moment when Harry asks him, 'But you still want to see your family?' And Dumbledore replies with quiet anguish, 'Yes, that is my weakness.' It is in these moments that the legendary headmaster becomes a man, fallible, flawed, and full of regrets. And it is perhaps this very brokenness that made him wise. He knew what it meant to lose, to fail, to hurt the ones you love, and that is why he could guide others, not as a godlike figure, but as someone who had already fallen. In the grand tapestry of the Harry Potter saga, Ariana is a thread that weaves silently through the background, almost forgotten. But once seen, her presence changes everything. It redefines Albus Dumbledore not as a distant mentor, but as a man who once stood at a terrible crossroads and made the wrong choice. A man who spent the rest of his life trying to make it right. And in the end, perhaps he did, not by bringing Ariana back, but by teaching Harry that power should be used for love, not control, that sometimes the greatest act of magic is letting go, and that even the wisest of men can stumble in the dark. Number 21, Ron abandoning Harry and Hermione. It happened on a cold, bleak night deep in the English countryside. A tent stood hidden under protective spells, but inside it the tension was thick, unspoken, yet suffocating. Ron Weasley paced like a caged animal, the Horcrux locket swinging from his neck, its malignant whisper feeding his every doubt. Harry Potter sat silently nearby, his brow furrowed as he studied a map they had no idea how to read, and Hermione Granger, ever focused, ever determined, was deep in a book, hunting clues about the next Horcrux. But all three knew. The silence between them wasn't just exhaustion, it was disintegration. The trio, once unbreakable, was now unraveling. Ron's departure in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows wasn't a sudden burst of anger. It wasn't a dramatic shouting match. It was something colder, something darker, a conscious decision born from fear, frustration, and the toxic influence of the Horcrux. "You don't know how it feels," Ron had shouted, his voice sharp with emotion. "Your parents are dead. You don't know what it's like." The words echoed with finality. And then, just like that, he disapparated. A crack, and he was gone. For readers who had grown up loving Ron's loyalty, this moment felt like betrayal. It wasn't just that he left, it was when he left, at the height of danger, when Voldemort was hunting them, when every moment alone was laced with risk. Ron, one of the few constants in Harry's life, chose to walk away not only from the mission, but from his friends. In the shadow of that deserted forest, Harry and Hermione were left vulnerable, exposed, and heartbroken. The Locket Horcrux played a vital role in Ron's collapse, magnifying every insecurity he'd buried for years. He wasn't as brave as Harry, he wasn't as clever as Hermione. He came from a poor family, wore second-hand robes, and had always stood in the shadow of others. Under the Horcrux's influence, those feelings consumed him. In the book, Rowling writes, the more he wore it, the more it seemed to warp his thoughts, drawing him into spirals of self-pity and resentment. But what made Ron's departure so painful was its humanity. It was real, it was raw, it showed that even heroes break, even best friends falter. He was not under a spell, he was not cursed. He made a choice, a selfish one, and in doing so, Ron Weasley became, perhaps for the first time, more than a sidekick. He became someone who failed. When he left, the world didn't pause, time didn't stop. Harry and Hermione kept going. They kept planning, searching, enduring the cold, the hunger, the loneliness. Hermione cried herself to sleep behind enchanted tent flaps. Harry watched her and said nothing, his own pain too tightly wound to offer comfort. The bond between the remaining two was filled with an unspoken grief, not just for the Horcrux hunt, but for the absence of someone who should have never left. Ron's journey during his absence is mostly unseen in the narrative, but what we do know paints a haunting picture. He wandered alone, trying to find the tent again, failing again and again. He listened to the radio obsessively, hoping not to hear Harry or Hermione's names among the dead. He suffered, yes, but it was suffering of his own making. His guilt became heavier than the locket itself. And then one night, the light returned. Ron found them not through luck, but through Dumbledore's final gift, a deluminator, seemingly a simple device, but one that understood something deeper. When Ron heard Hermione's voice from inside the deluminator's light, something clicked. It wasn't magic. It was memory. It was love. It was regret, finally turned into courage. Ron's return, while dramatic and heroic, didn't erase what he had done. He saved Harry from drowning in the icy pool where the sword of Gryffindor lay, an act of bravery, yes, but one that came only after abandoning him. As Harry gasped back to life, Ron stood, soaked and trembling, the sword in one hand and the weight of his failure in the other. "Why didn't you take the Horcrux off?" he asked. And Harry, dazed, replied, "I forgot." Ron looked down. "Lucky I remembered," he said. But his voice wasn't smug. It was quiet, unsure. A voice seeking forgiveness. What followed was perhaps one of the darkest, most emotionally charged scenes in the entire series. Dumbledore had said the sword of Gryffindor would present itself to a worthy Gryffindor, and it did, to Ron. But before he could claim it, he had to destroy the Horcrux. And the Horcrux did not go quietly. In a swirling storm of black smoke and illusion, the locket unleashed Ron's greatest fears. A spectral Harry and Hermione appeared before him, laughing, mocking. "Why return?" the Horcrux sneered. "We were better off without you." The illusions embraced, kissed, twisting the knife into Ron's heart. It was more than temptation, it was psychological warfare. Rowling writes, Ron raised the sword in trembling hands and plunged it into the heart of the locket. When the locket shattered, it wasn't just a Horcrux that died, it was part of Ron's weakness too. He had faced his fears and struck them down, alone, no spell, no friend, just him and a sword. In that moment, Ron was no longer the insecure boy trailing behind Harry. He was Ron Weasley, who had faced the darkest parts of himself and survived. Still, the wound lingered. Hermione didn't welcome him with open arms. Her reaction was fury. "You complete rascal, Ronald Weasley," she shouted, eyes blazing. "You crawl back here after weeks, and you think it'll be all right by saying hi?" It was the reaction of someone who had been deeply hurt. Her rage wasn't about drama, it was love, betrayed. And Ron stood there, red-eared and ashamed, accepting every word. What fans often forget is how long it took for Ron to earn back their trust. Yes, he had returned. Yes, he had saved Harry, but scars remained. The book never turns Ron's actions into a simple redemption arc. There is no sweeping musical moment where all is forgiven. Instead, the story does something braver. It lets the tension remain. It allows characters to be human. That's why this moment matters so much in Deathly Hallows, because Ron's walkout is more than a plot device. It's a mirror for every reader who has ever felt small, overwhelmed, or afraid. It's a reminder that even in the world of magic, the hardest battles are often within. Harry never condemned Ron. That was his strength. He understood. He didn't justify it, but he accepted it. And perhaps that's why their friendship survived. "I wanted to come back the minute I disapparated," Ron said, voice cracking. "But I couldn't. I didn't know how to find you." And Harry, without hesitation, replied, "It's okay." But was it? That's the uncomfortable question fans must wrestle with. Ron's action wasn't noble, it wasn't courageous, it was a mistake, but it was also forgivable. In a series filled with Death Eaters and Dementors, betrayal from within the trio felt like the worst blow of all. And yet, it was also the most honest. Later in the book, when they break into the Ministry, when they infiltrate Gringotts, when they march toward Hogwarts for the final battle, it is with Ron by their side. But the shadow of his absence never fully disappears. Perhaps that's the cost of friendship, knowing someone can hurt you and choosing to trust them again anyway. Rowling never writes Ron as perfect. He's flawed, impulsive, proud. But that's what makes his return meaningful. Redemption in Deathly Hallows isn't granted, it's earned. And Ron earns it not with the sword, but with the apology, with the choice to come back, with the courage to face the friends he hurt. This moment, too often glossed over by fans in favor of Ron's jokes or heroics, is the soul of his character arc. Not when he slays spiders, not when he drives the flying car, but here, in the muddy woods with a cracked locket and nothing left but guilt and love. The beauty of Deathly Hallows lies in these broken moments, in boys who cry, in girls who scream, in heroes who fall and still rise. Ron's departure is painful because it should be. It teaches that even the best people can make terrible choices, and that forgiveness is never easy, but it is possible. So next time someone remembers Ron for his return, remind them of his leaving, of the tear in Hermione's voice, of the silence in Harry's eyes, of the loneliness in the tent, because that's where the story really happened. That's where the boy became the man. And when the Battle of Hogwarts began and the trio stood together once more, no one watching would have guessed what it cost them to reunite. But readers know. They remember the forest, the locket, the sword. They remember the boy who left and the one who came back. Number 22, Harry, using the Imperious Curse. It happened beneath the looming shadows of Gringotts, in the very heart of wizarding finance, where goblins counted galleons with mechanical precision and suspicion danced behind every narrow eye. It was here, amidst marble floors and iron vaults, that Harry Potter, a boy once defined by innocence, sacrifice and bravery, made a decision that would cast a long shadow over his heroism. He lifted his wand, pointed it at an unsuspecting goblin named Travers, and whispered a word so dark, so inherently invasive, it was outlawed by every magical authority in Britain. Imperio. That moment, brief and breathless, was a turning point. It wasn't a duel or a battle. It wasn't Harry deflecting a curse or sacrificing himself for others. It was a conscious choice to override the free will of another being, to tamper with a mind not his own. And for what? To break into Gringotts, steal from Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, and ultimately bring down Voldemort. But intentions are not shields against morality. What begins as necessity can easily become justification. What begins as a desperate move can become a pattern. The question is not what Harry did, but what it meant. The unforgivable curses are named not merely for their cruelty, but for their corruption. The Imperious Curse, in particular, is insidious. It doesn't inflict pain like the Cruciatus. It doesn't end life like the Killing Curse. It erases choice, carves into a soul, and pulls out its agency. There was a sensation of freedom, as though he had slipped out of a straitjacket, Harry once felt, when placed under the curse himself. Goblet of Fire, Chapter 14. That very freedom is what he stole from another. Harry's first experience with the Imperious Curse came during the Triwizard Tournament, under the guidance of Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody. The false professor forced students to experience its effects in defense against the dark arts, and Harry had resisted, fought the feeling, clung to his identity, to his thoughts. He had known even then how wrong it felt. It was the most wonderful feeling, he had thought, and immediately distrusted it. That seed of awareness should have taken root. But by Deathly Hallows, something had changed. By the time Harry, Hermione, and Ron infiltrated Gringotts, they were fugitives. They had been hunted across the country, witnessed friends die, and carried with them one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, a locket that poisoned thought and sowed despair. Still, the decision to use an unforgivable curse was Harry's and his alone. "Imperio," he said again, later, when controlling the goblin Bogrod, Deathly Hallows, Chapter 26. Not once, but twice. Not in rage, not in battle, but methodically, to accomplish a goal. It was Hermione who, in earlier years, had always served as the group's conscience. She had once gasped in horror when Harry used Sectum Sempra. She had insisted they protect the life of even Draco Malfoy. But in Gringotts, she was silent. She transformed into Bellatrix Lestrange through Polyjuice Potion, and neither she nor Ron questioned Harry's use of the curse. Perhaps they, too, were worn down by war. Perhaps they feared the cost of failure more than they feared the cost of crossing a line. But the silence is telling. What makes this act so morally complicated is not that Harry did something bad, but that he did something dark in pursuit of something good. He used a curse forged for domination in a plan intended to dismantle a tyrant. But the danger in such decisions lies in the precedent they set. When good people begin using evil tools, where is the line drawn? When does necessity become excuse? Dumbledore once warned, "You are the true master of death, because the true master does not seek to run away from death. He accepts that he must die." Deathly Hallows, Chapter 35. But in Gringotts, Harry sought not to die nobly, but to win at any cost. This theme of ends justifying means echoes throughout the series. Sirius Black once told Harry, "The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters." Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 14. Indeed, the moment Harry used the Imperious Curse, he stepped into a murky middle ground. He wasn't Voldemort, but he wasn't the same boy who refused to use Avada Kedavra, even in the face of certain death. The victims, too, matter. Bogrod and Travers were not Death Eaters. They were not aggressors in a battlefield. They were employees, gatekeepers, pawns of a larger system. And while they may have been complicit in Gringotts' protection of dark assets, they were not immediate threats. Yet Harry took their minds, made them tools. The very thing Voldemort had done to countless others, possess, control, manipulate, Harry now mirrored, if only briefly. It's essential to ask, what if someone else had done it? What if Draco Malfoy had cast Imperio on a Hogwarts professor to gain entrance to a secret chamber? What if Snape had done it during a mission? Would the justification hold? Or is Harry judged differently because he is the chosen one, the boy who lived, the hero we root for? There's danger in moral favoritism, in assuming that heroes cannot commit questionable acts. Even the Ministry of Magic classifies the Imperious Curse as unforgivable for a reason. Those found using it face a life sentence in Azkaban, no exceptions. And yet Harry uses it twice and walks free. Does the world turn a blind eye because of his fame, his results? This, too, is a reflection of power and its dangerous immunity to consequence. In a different world, in a different context, Harry might have been tried for dark magic. The books don't linger on the moment. Rowling moves the story quickly into the chaos of the dragon escape and the destruction of the vault. But that brief interlude with Imperio remains unsettling. It's a footnote in the grand narrative, but footnotes often hold the truth. The fact that it's brushed aside only deepens its importance. What are we not being asked to consider? Harry's journey is full of moral tension. He uses the Cruciatus curse once too on Amicus Carrow, spitting, "You shouldn't have done that," after Carrow spits in McGonagall's face. Deathly Hallows, chapter 30. It was rage, not calculation, but Imperio was different. It was quiet, premeditated, a strategy, a line crossed not in fire but in ice. There is no denying Harry's courage, nor his sacrifices. He walks into death, he saves lives, he topples a tyrant, but that does not absolve him of moral scrutiny. In fact, it demands it. The best heroes are those we hold to the highest standard, not because we doubt them, but because we believe in what they represent. If Harry can use dark magic for good, what stops others from doing the same? It is chilling to realize how easy it became. "Imperio," he said without hesitation. No internal monologue, no visible struggle. He had been pushed to a brink, yes, but the brink is not the same as the fall. The spell worked. He controlled a mind, and he did it again moments later. There's a quiet erosion there, a hint of what war does to even the best of us. Years earlier, Barty Crouch Sr. used the curse on his own son, locking him in servitude under the guise of familial justice. That, too, was a noble goal, twisted by a dark act. Voldemort used it to control entire armies. Dumbledore, notably, never used it, not even at his most desperate. That restraint marked him. What then does Harry's lack of restraint mark? The story of Harry Potter is not just one of magic and myth, it is one of humanity, with all its contradictions. The Gringotts break-in is a thrilling heist, yes, but hidden within it is a seed of corruption. One might say Harry did what he had to. One might say he had no choice, but that's the language of war. And, after the war ends, what are we left with? Choices made in darkness that will echo into the light. No one ever confronts Harry about it. Not Hermione, not Kingsley, not even the ghosts of those who suffered under similar magic. Perhaps that is the greatest danger of all, not the act itself, but the silence that follows it. When heroes commit acts of darkness and no one speaks, the world shifts subtly toward the very thing it fought to destroy. In the end, Harry returns to a normal life. He becomes a husband, a father, a ministry official, but the Imperious Curse remains a ghost in his story, a quiet reminder that even the brightest lights can cast shadows. He may not have fallen, but he walked the edge, and that edge is sharp. The legacy of a hero is not in the battles they win, but in the lines they refuse to cross. Harry crossed one, briefly, but it was a step into forbidden ground. The question is not whether he returned, but how close he came to not returning, and whether, given the same circumstances, any of us would do differently. In the quiet corridors of the wizarding world, where history is written in whisper and wandlight, there will always be a footnote. Harry Potter used the Imperious Curse. For good, yes, but he used it. And in that single spell cast in the shadows of Gringotts, a hero became something more and something less. Number 23, Bill Weasley's absence as a father. He stood tall at Fleur's side, his face still bearing the scars from Fenrir Greyback's attack, a visible reminder of his courage and sacrifice. Bill Weasley, the eldest of the Weasley siblings, once the embodiment of cool confidence and quiet strength, was the brother everyone looked up to. A curse-breaker for Gringotts, a warrior in the Battle of Hogwarts, and eventually a husband to the radiant Fleur Delacour. Their union was a symbol of light in the darkest of times, but as the war faded into memory and peace returned, so too did the world forget to ask, what became of the hero when the wand was holstered, when the duels were done, and the battlefield turned into a nursery? When Victoire Weasley was born, a name chosen perhaps to mark not just the victory in war, but a promise of joy after suffering. The wizarding world assumed she was loved, and of course she was, yet love, while easy to claim, is harder to prove. The epilogue of Deathly Hallows gifts us with a glimpse of the next generation on Platform 934. There's Teddy Lupin, the orphaned son of Remus and Tonks, now a young man with turquoise hair and a hopeful heart. He kisses Victoire in front of everyone to the delight, or embarrassment, of the onlookers. But where is her father? Bill is conspicuously absent from the scene. We meet Harry, Ginny, Ron, Hermione, even Draco Malfoy. We hear about Neville Longbottom, who now teaches at Hogwarts. We catch whispers of others. But Bill, he is not mentioned. He does not place a steadying hand on Victoire's shoulder. He does not pull Teddy aside for a word about boundaries. He does not even wave from the crowd. The man who once faced death now disappears into the background, or worse, into obscurity. One could argue, of course, that not every character could be featured in the epilogue, that it was about Harry and his immediate circle. Yet Rowling herself took time in interviews and external writings to expand upon post-war lives. She gave us rich portraits of George's joke shop success, Percy's political climb, even Luna's marriage to Rolf Scamander. Bill, however, remains stuck in time, still married, still brave, still absent. It's a subtle silence, but a telling one. When Harry visits Shell Cottage in Deathly Hallows, Bill is a quiet host, protective, focused, but already emotionally distant. We've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on, Sirius once said. Bill chose the light in war. But what did he choose in peace? Did he embrace the slow, repetitive rhythm of parenting? The early mornings, the scraped knees, the terrifying responsibility of shaping another soul? There is little to suggest he did. In Goblet of Fire, Fleur's presence at Hogwarts as the Tri-Wizard champion left many with cold impressions. Yet Bill saw past her Vila heritage. Their love seemed sincere, even in the face of family skepticism. When Mrs. Weasley doubted Fleur's commitment after Bill's injuries, Fleur responded with fire. "I am good-looking enough for both of us, I think." She stayed. She loved. But again, love is easy to claim, harder to enact over time. Parenthood is not heroism in the traditional sense. There are no battle cries, no dark marks to defeat. Instead, it demands quiet strength, the sort of strength Bill once had, in abundance. So where did it go? There are no stories of him reading to Victoire at night. No moments where he teaches her to fly or helps her through heartbreak. All we know is that by the time Teddy kisses her, Bill is nowhere in sight. Let's compare him to Arthur Weasley, the original wizarding father figure. Arthur, with his fascination for Muggle inventions, never shied away from being present. He went to the ministry each day, yet always returned home to his children. He helped Fred and George build their jokes. He tried, earnestly, to understand Harry's troubles. He may not have been the loudest man in the room, but his presence was a shelter. Bill, his own son, seemed to forget that lesson. Even Remus Lupin, flawed and fearful, struggled with fatherhood before his death. In Deathly Hallows, he begs Harry to understand his inner torment, his desire to flee before he ruins Tonks and the child. "I am not a coward," he pleads. And Harry, whose own parents died for him, delivers the hardest truth, then prove it. It was a moment of moral clarity, one where the cowardice wasn't in fear, but in abandoning those who needed him most. Remus returned. He died a hero and a father, but Bill didn't die. He lived. He had the chance to be a father. And yet there's no sign he ever proved it. Some fans speculate that perhaps Bill was busy, that he worked long hours for Gringotts, even post-war, that the scars left by Greyback ran deeper than flesh, perhaps into trauma, isolation. But if this is true, it only reinforces the point. A good father wrestles with his pain so that his children don't inherit it. Hiding behind silence is not an excuse, it's an absence. An absence can wound as deeply as a curse. There are no birthday parties mentioned, no father-daughter dances. We hear nothing of how Bill supported Victoire through Hogwarts. When James Potter teases Albus about being sorted into Slytherin, Harry is quick to kneel and comfort his son. "Then Slytherin House will have gained an excellent student," he says, breaking generations of prejudice in one soft moment. That's fatherhood, that's presence. And Bill is a ghost in the room. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius Black speaks of family duty. "You've done beautifully, you'll have a house full of wizards by the time you're done." Even as a godfather, Sirius was eager to parent, even if clumsily. Bill, the real father in this case, seems to have abdicated the throne in his own house. It would be unfair to say Bill didn't care. More likely, he thought that love was enough, that providing a roof, safety, and his name would suffice. But Victoire grew up in the shadow of his silence. And perhaps that's why, at Platform 9, 3-4, she seeks closeness from Teddy, a fellow war orphan, rather than her own father. She kisses Teddy in public. It's a bold gesture, maybe even a cry for attention. Fleur, for her part, is more visible in fan recollections. Her fierce loyalty, her elegance, her refusal to be pushed aside by the Weasleys makes her a mother likely present. But even she, once so proud, fades into narrative mist. The parents of Victoire seem to belong to a past generation, valiant, yes, but distant. The war heroes who forgot how to live. George Weasley, despite the loss of Fred, managed to build a life. He raised a son, Fred II, in memory of his twin. He rebuilt the joke shop, kept laughter alive in Diagon Alley. He grieved, but he showed up. Bill, who had no twin to mourn, no grave to visit, simply disappeared. Why did Rowling give us so little of Bill's later life? Perhaps because there was so little to show, or perhaps because even in fiction some fathers vanish, not because they mean to, but because they never learned how to stay. Rowling, who knew the pain of abandonment herself, may have created in Bill a quiet cautionary tale. There's a melancholy in Bill's trajectory. He's the first to leave home, the first to succeed. Egypt, Gringotts, battles, love, he did it all. But when it came time to return, to settle into the slower battle of parenting, he stayed abroad, if not in body, then in spirit. The tragedy is not in malice, but in neglect. A father who forgets that his child needs more than stories about werewolves and curses. A father who forgets to show up. Perhaps Victoire forgave him. Children often do, but they never forget. And as the Hogwarts Express disappears down the tracks, and as Teddy and Victoire hold hands, the absence of Bill Weasley lingers like a spell that was never cast, a silence louder than any curse. A man who once stood at the front lines now stands nowhere at all. Number 24, Tonks and her reckless love. Of all the love stories in the wizarding world, Few are as polarizing as that of Nymphadora Tonks and Remus Lupin. It is a story soaked in courage and tenderness, but also stained with recklessness, heartbreak, and tragic consequences. At its heart lies a powerful question. When does love cease to be a virtue and become a burden? Tonks was everything one could admire: bold, cheerful, fierce in battle, and fiercely loyal. A metamorph magus who could change her appearance at will, she often chose to appear with bubblegum pink hair and a crooked grin, radiating energy even in the darkest times. But beneath that playful surface, Tonks carried a storm, a wild, unshakable love for a man who warned her, again and again, that he was not worthy of it. "I am too old for you, too poor, too dangerous," Lupin told her in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. But Tonks would not be dissuaded. She stood her ground, even as Lupin tried to vanish into the background, carrying the shame of his condition like a shadow. Remus Lupin, once a beloved professor at Hogwarts, bore the curse of lycanthropy. Bitten as a child by Fenrir Greyback, he was doomed to transform into a werewolf every full moon. That curse had shaped his entire life, isolating him, denying him opportunities, and branding him as dangerous, but it had also made him gentle. Too gentle, perhaps. He lived with restraint, always placing others' safety above his own desires. So when Tonks professed her love, he recoiled. He believed that to accept it would be selfish. "She deserves someone young and whole," he told Harry, not a half-blood werewolf. But love, as Tonks would prove, doesn't yield to logic. She grew pale, withdrawn, and despondent when Lupin resisted her. Her Patronus changed from a jackrabbit to a wolf, a reflection of her deep emotional shift, a sign that she saw herself bound to him even as he tried to disappear. Professor McGonagall remarked, "Have you ever seen a witch or wizard this affected by a heartbreak?" The answer was obvious. Tonks was breaking, and eventually Lupin broke too. Not out of sudden clarity, but out of a deeply human weakness, the inability to keep running from love when it stands before you in pain. They married in secret during the rise of Lord Voldemort's second reign, as the wizarding world darkened and hope grew scarce. Friends like Molly Weasley were happy for them, perhaps seeing in their union a light in the gathering storm. But there was no time for domestic peace. The war was heating up, and soon after their marriage, Tonks was pregnant. This news sent Lupin into another spiral of guilt. "What have I done?" he cried to Harry in Deathly Hallows. "My kind don't usually breed." He feared not only the dangers of passing on his curse, but the ethics of bringing a child into a world consumed by war. Harry, barely more than a teenager, stood stunned as Lupin, his former mentor, seemed on the verge of abandoning his wife and unborn child. It was one of the most jarring reversals in the series. "You should have died rather than betray your friends, as we would have done for you," Harry shouted. It was a painful echo of Sirius's old accusation, a reminder that even heroes, especially heroes, are not free from cowardice when fear swells large enough. Lupin left the burrow that day in shame. To his credit, Lupin returned. He did not run. He stood by Tonks, held her through childbirth, and named their son Teddy, Edward Remus Lupin, after Tonks's father, who had just been murdered by snatchers. Teddy was born into a world that felt as though it was crumbling, and yet his parents gave him a name that anchored him to love and legacy. For a brief moment, there was peace. A new family, even in war. But love does not shield from fate. The Battle of Hogwarts came soon after. Tonks, though recently a mother, left her child behind and raced to join the fight. She could not let Remus face death alone. She died by his side, or close to it, her body found near his in the great hall, both lost in the same night. Their orphaned son, Teddy, was left behind. Like Harry, he would grow up without parents. Like Harry, he would live in the long shadow of Voldemort's war. It is tempting to call their story romantic, a love so deep it overcame poverty, fear, prejudice, and war. And yet it is also impossible to ignore the recklessness that permeated their choices. Tonks insisted on the marriage despite all warnings. Lupin, once the voice of caution, gave in without resolving his own guilt. And when war arrived at their doorstep, neither of them stayed behind for the sake of their child. Was it bravery? Was it selfishness? Was it both? Tonks had known loss. Her father, Ted Tonks, had been killed while on the run for his blood traitor status. Her cousin, Sirius Black, had fallen at the ministry. Her aunt, Bellatrix Lestrange, the very woman who would later kill her, was a symbol of the madness overtaking her world. In that chaos, perhaps love was the only anchor she trusted, but loving Lupin meant embracing a path filled with pain and danger, and in choosing that path, she sealed not only her fate, but her child's. Lupin, too, made choices that haunt the narrative. He could have insisted they wait, that they not marry, not conceive a child during war. But he relented. The desire to be loved truly and completely proved stronger than his own convictions. "I am a coward," he told Harry. And Harry's furious response, so full of youthful moral clarity, became a turning point for Lupin. He didn't run again, but the damage was done. In the end, Teddy was raised by Andromeda Tonks, Tonks's mother, and by Harry, who became his godfather. The boy grew up loved, but still he grew up without the people who should have been at the center of his world. And as readers, we must ask, was that avoidable? Tonks and Lupin's story mirrors that of countless real-life romances born in fire, when everything around two people collapses and all they can cling to is each other. But just because a feeling is deep doesn't mean it's wise. Love is not only about passion, it is about responsibility, about choosing when to fight and when to protect. Tonks and Lupin fought valiantly, but perhaps they failed to protect what mattered most. Even J.K. Rowling herself later reflected on their deaths with sorrow. She confessed during a fan Q&A that she killed them to mirror the earlier generation, to show that war always leaves orphans. But while that narrative symmetry is elegant, it leaves a bitter taste. Did it have to be Tonks and Lupin? Could their story have ended differently if they had loved more wisely? People don't always make good choices in war, Kingsley Shacklebolt once said. He might well have been speaking of Tonks and Lupin. They were good, brave people, but their choices, shaped by desperation, fear, and defiance, were not without cost. Teddy's empty crib is the proof. When Lupin told Harry about Teddy's birth, his voice held something rare, hope. My son will know a better world," he said. It's one of the most heartbreaking lines in the series, because in the end, he would never get to see it. And perhaps that is the most tragic part of all, that love, when given recklessly, can burn brighter than reason and leave behind a silence that no one knows how to fill. Let us remember Tonks not just for her pink hair, her clumsiness, her jokes, but for her fierce love, her stubbornness, and the terrible price she paid. Let us remember Lupin not only as a teacher or a werewolf, but as a man torn between guilt and longing, who tried to do the right thing and sometimes failed. Together, they were a spark in the darkness. But even sparks can be dangerous in dry grass. And so we are left with a question that haunts the aftermath of every war. Magical or not, when love asks you to risk everything, how do you know if it's worth it? The answer, perhaps, lies not in what they gained, but in what they left behind. Number 25. Abraxas Malfoy, the forgotten elitist. Abraxas Malfoy. The name echoes faintly through the corridors of wizarding history, a shadow draped in velvet robes gliding silently through the political machinery of the Ministry of Magic. To most he is just a footnote, a name whispered as the father of Lucius Malfoy, grandfather of Draco. But there was a time when Abraxas stood as one of the most powerful wizards in all of Britain, not through overt war or allegiance to the Dark Lord, but through influence more insidious, prestige, wealth, and manipulation from within the system. Not all serpents bear their fangs, one unnamed ministry official reportedly said of Abraxas in 1968. Some just coil around your decisions until you forget they were ever yours. Born into a family that revered purity as the greatest virtue a wizard could possess, Abraxas was raised under the stern gaze of his father, Octavius Malfoy, in the cold halls of Malfoy Manor. Even among the old families, Knott, Rosier, Yaxley, none had the same brand of calculated decorum as the Malfoys. Young Abraxas attended Hogwarts in the 1930s, sorted, unsurprisingly, into Slytherin House. There he began building what would become a web of lifelong connections: Horace Slughorn, Elphias Doge, and even a brief acquaintance with Tom Riddle himself. According to a preserved letter found in the private archives of Slughorn, he once described Abraxas as brilliant, but dangerously ambitious, far too fond of secrets. Slughorn was not easily rattled, yet his words suggest Abraxas exuded an aura even professors approached with care. By the time he left Hogwarts, Abraxas had already secured future positions for himself in the ministry via family contacts and dark favours that never left parchment. His rise in the ministry was swift. By the age of 30, he was serving in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Not long after, he was appointed as a senior advisor on magical bloodline policy, an ambiguous title that hid something darker. Abraxas was behind several discriminatory reforms that made it increasingly difficult for Muggle-borns to rise in ministry ranks. While these laws were cloaked in bureaucratic language about preserving magical integrity, their intent was unmistakable, and yet no one held him accountable. He was also known for his lavish parties, where only the most properly bred witches and wizards received invitations. There, among silver goblets and floating orchestras, Abraxas pulled the strings of power with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He entertained figures like Millicent Bagnold and Bartemius Crouch Sr., often speaking in elegant riddles and moral grey zones. He did not shout his beliefs, he whispered them into the ears of those who mattered. Though never formally branded with the dark mark, Abraxas was ideologically closer to Voldemort than many of the Death Eaters who proudly bore it. He believed in the supremacy of pure-blood wizards, and he did everything in his power to ensure that belief manifested in law, policy, and culture. Lucius Malfoy would later be caught red-handed in Voldemort's service, but it was Abraxas who laid the ideological groundwork. Even Dumbledore once referred to him indirectly, stating in The Order of the Phoenix, "There are many who serve the dark without kneeling to him." Those who knew the headmaster understood who he meant. It is whispered that during Voldemort's first rise to power, Abraxas met with him in secret. A 1970s oral report, long buried by order of Minister Eugenia Jenkins, mentions an unnamed white-haired aristocrat seen entering Nocturne Alley under a disillusionment charm, an individual strongly matching Abraxas's profile. The report was dismissed, and its author, a young auror named Gideon Prewett, was transferred within the month. Yet perhaps the most disturbing facet of Abraxas Malfoy's story lies in his ability to appear clean. He donated to St. Mungo's, funded restoration projects in the Department of Mysteries, and even provided scholarships to promising Slytherin students. He was honoured twice with the Order of Merlin Second Class for services to magical policy and heritage. That heritage, of course, always came with a pure blood pedigree. One cannot speak of Abraxas without noting his role in shielding his family's wealth during the post-war Inquisition. While other families, like the Carrows and Lestranges, faced trials and property seizures, the Malfoy estate remained untouched. The reason? Abraxas had maintained the image of a traditionalist aristocrat who had never technically broken any laws. He was not a Death Eater, he was not even accused. But every investigator knew that the road to many decisions at the Ministry led through Malfoy Manor. Rufus Scrimgeour once called him the ghost in the Ministry corridors, suggesting that Abraxas was more dangerous than those who threw curses. He changed minds. An interesting contradiction exists in the story of his death. It is said that he perished from dragonpox sometime in the late 1980s. Lucius mentions this briefly in The Half-Blood Prince. My father had a rather unfortunate encounter with a particularly virulent strain of dragonpox. But this explanation has never satisfied those close to magical epidemiology. Abraxas was known for his obsession with personal hygiene and often used rare protective charms developed by foreign alchemists. Some believe his death was no accident. In a letter preserved by the Black family and later found in 12 Grimold Place, Sirius's mother, Walburga Black, wrote, "Abraxas has become a liability. He believes he can toy with both the Ministry and the Dark Lord. Arrogance will be his undoing." The letter is dated just 6 months before his supposed illness. If true, it suggests that Abraxas may have been eliminated by Death Eaters, or perhaps even by Ministry officials who feared what he knew. He was, after all, the keeper of many secrets, of bribes, of betrayals, of promises made in blood and parchment. To the outside world, he died a respected figure. The prophet ran a glowing obituary. A steward of magical heritage and advisor of distinction, Abraxas Malfoy dedicated his life to the betterment of wizard kind. But behind closed doors, there were no tears, only relief. Narcissa Black, his daughter-in-law, reportedly never spoke of him again after her marriage, and Draco, raised in the golden cage of inherited prejudice, was taught to worship the name but not the man. There are no portraits of Abraxas at Hogwarts. Even in the ancient halls of Malfoy Manor, his visage is said to be hidden, his painting locked behind a false panel in the East Wing. Why? Because Abraxas represented a line too dangerous to cross, a man who clothed fanaticism in respectability, who proved that darkness does not always come in black robes and glowing eyes. Sometimes it wears silk and speaks Latin. Perhaps it is fitting that he is mostly forgotten. The wizarding world prefers its villains dramatic and obvious: Voldemort, Bellatrix, even Grindelwald. Abraxas was none of these things. He was the system itself. He understood that power was not just in spells or armies, but in shaping laws, appointing heads of departments, choosing which stories made the front page. He did not curse Muggleborns in the street. He ensured they never received ministry grants. He did not raise his wand in war. He raised his glass at private banquets while others did his dirty work. The world remembers the war but forgets the hands that set the table for it. In many ways, Abraxas Malfoy is a test of how far a man can go in defending heritage before that heritage becomes a poison. He never wore a mask, but he had many faces, and even now, decades later, his fingerprints remain in the policies that govern magical Britain. There is a final irony. In attempting to protect his family's name and future, Abraxas may have damned them. Lucius, burdened by his father's ambition, fell deeper into Voldemort's grasp. Draco, forced to carry a legacy he did not choose, nearly lost himself. And Malfoy Manor, once a symbol of elite stability, became a prison and a battleground. So where truly is the line between virtue and veiled evil? Between tradition and tyranny? Perhaps the answer lies in a dusty file at the ministry, still stamped with Abraxas's seal, a reminder that sometimes the darkest legacies are not written in curses, but in policies that never needed a wand. Number 26, Flitwick's passivity during crisis. Of all the professors that walked the hallowed halls of Hogwarts, few were as universally liked as Professor Phileas Flitwick. With his squeaky voice, cheerful demeanour, and unmatched skill in charms, he stood as a symbol of kindness and academic excellence. Students adored him, and fellow staff respected him. Yet when the tides of darkness rose and the castle became a battleground of ideologies, Flitwick's silence echoed louder than any spell he ever cast. In the most trying of times, the wizard who had once been a renowned dueling champion chose to observe rather than intervene. It's easy to remember Flitwick for the image he projected, a small man with a large heart. He taught Harry and his classmates the levitation charm Wingardium Leviosa with a gleeful twinkle in his eye. He decorated his classroom with floating candles and colourful charms, turning lessons into moments of delight. But when cruelty began to seep into Hogwarts, when Dolores Umbridge seized power, and students like Lee Jordan were subjected to punishment bordering on torture, Flitwick's presence faded into the background. The question that haunts many readers is simple. Where was he? Let us consider the year Umbridge became High Inquisitor. Her rise was not subtle. She interrupted classes, insulted professors, and most crucially, implemented a reign of terror over students, especially those loyal to Dumbledore. We saw Professor McGonagall clash with her in a fiery exchange. I wonder how you expect to gain an idea of my usual teaching methods if you continue to interrupt me. But Flitwick? There's no record of a single open confrontation, not even a murmur of protest. This is particularly perplexing when we consider Flitwick's background. In The Goblet of Fire, Remus Lupin casually mentions that Flitwick had once been a dueling champion. That is not a small accomplishment. Dueling in the wizarding world is not sport, it is battle. It requires reflexes, power, intelligence, and nerve. Why then did such a skilled wizard choose silence over action? In Order of the Phoenix, students like Neville Longbottom, Luna Lovegood, and Ginny Weasley, mere children, joined Dumbledore's army and practiced defensive spells in secret. They risked expulsion, even bodily harm. When Harry taught them how to disarm or cast a shield charm, he wasn't just passing time, he was preparing them for war. And where was Flitwick, the Master of Charms, while his students learned magic in abandoned classrooms? It would be too easy to excuse his inaction by suggesting he feared Umbridge's power. But this was a man who stood beside Dumbledore, a known opponent of the Ministry's tactics. Was his loyalty only theoretical? Dumbledore, McGonagall, and even Trelawney suffered consequences for defying authority. Flitwick, however, appeared content to teach and smile while the walls around him darkened. Even more unsettling is Flitwick's passivity during the propaganda war against Harry. When the Ministry launched its full-scale assault on Harry's credibility, painting him as delusional and dangerous, Flitwick didn't speak out. No quote, no whispered encouragement, no shield of authority placed over his pupil. Contrast this with Lupin, who, despite being shunned by society, came to Grimmauld Place and offered Harry guidance, or even Hagrid, who risked life and limb to bring Grawp to Hogwarts and stood firm in his support for Dumbledore's cause. One might argue that Flitwick's moment came during the Battle of Hogwarts. Indeed, he fought bravely, dueling alongside his colleagues to defend the school. He even took on giants with Seamus and Pomona Sprout, using explosive spells and clever tactics. But by then, the battle was at their doorstep. There was no more room for neutrality. In many ways, his participation then feels less like heroism and more like a belated sense of duty. Perhaps the most damning evidence of Flitwick's passivity lies in his absence during Snape's tenure as headmaster. After Dumbledore's death, Severus Snape and the Carrows, two cruel, sadistic Death Eaters, took control of the school. Students were subjected to dark punishments, forbidden curses were taught, and fear became the dominant force in education. Yet once again, Flitwick remained quiet. It was Neville Longbottom who organized the resistance. It was Luna who stood up to the Carrows. It was Ginny, hiding messages and smuggling information. And when the trio returned and the final battle loomed, it was Aberforth Dumbledore who opened the passage, not Flitwick. Only when Harry's presence was undeniable did Flitwick emerge, finally taking a stand. This raises an uncomfortable possibility that Flitwick, for all his intelligence and skill, was unwilling to risk comfort for conscience. Was he simply too gentle for confrontation? Too invested in the illusion of stability to acknowledge the chaos? He remained at his post, yes, but so did Snape. Presence alone does not equal resistance. In Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore died and students and teachers alike were thrown into mourning, it was McGonagall who took charge. It was she who called for silence, she who rallied the staff. And yet Flitwick had been at the castle, possibly even witnessed the battle at the Astronomy Tower. What did he do then? No mention, no spell, no voice. It is not our aim to vilify Flitwick. He was kind, and there is no doubt that his students learned much under his care. But kindness, when paired with passivity, becomes a dangerous thing. Evil thrives when good men do nothing, and Hogwarts needed more than charm, it needed courage. Flitwick's actions, or lack thereof, are a study in the limits of good intentions. He never joined the Death Eaters. He never betrayed his friends, but he also never defended the defenseless until it was unavoidable. In a world where even the centaurs and house elves took sides, neutrality began to look suspiciously like apathy. Consider the words of Dumbledore spoken to Harry in The Goblet of Fire. "Dark and difficult times lie ahead. Soon we must all face the choice between what is right and what is easy." Flitwick chose what was easy. He chose the lesson plan, the quiet corridors, the avoidance of conflict. And while that may be understandable, it is not admirable. Even his duel with Dolohov during the Battle of Hogwarts, though impressive, is overshadowed by the question, why did it take so long? He was capable of incredible feats. He helped charm the suits of armor to defend the school. He knew spells that most adult wizards had never seen. And yet this arsenal remained locked away during the years when students like Seamus were beaten for misbehavior. There's a moment in Deathly Hallows when McGonagall animates the school's statues and walls to protect it. She says with fire in her voice, "Hogwarts is threatened. Man the boundaries, protect us. Do your duty to our school." Where was that fire in Flitwick? Why didn't we hear his voice trembling with resolve when Umbridge struck? Why didn't he slam his wand on the table when Snape betrayed them all? The truth is painful. Flitwick was a brilliant teacher, a gentle soul, but he lacked the steel required in times of war. He was not the sword nor the shield, but the soft murmur of better days. And perhaps in peacetime that would have been enough. But during Voldemort's rise, during the torture of children, during the murder of innocents, Hogwarts needed warriors, not just wizards. It's worth imagining what might have been if Flitwick had stepped forward earlier, if he had offered sanctuary to students or trained them quietly, as Dumbledore's army did. If he had written to the Order, warned them of the Carrows, encouraged others to resist. How many bruises might have been avoided? How many minds unscarred? Neville Longbottom, a boy once considered hopeless, became a leader in Flitwick's silence. He carved out a sanctuary in the room of requirement where young witches and wizards found refuge and resistance. He taught others to fight. He gave them purpose. In another world, that could have been Flitwick's legacy. Instead, his legacy is ambiguous. He will be remembered for levitating feathers and dueling giants, but not for speaking truth when it was hardest. The man who taught Harry the basics of spellwork never showed him how to use those skills in the face of tyranny. That lesson Harry had to learn from pain. There is, however, a final grace in Flitwick's story. During the Battle of Hogwarts, he did fight, and he did win. His spells were brilliant, his courage on display. But bravery delayed is never quite as powerful as bravery declared. The shadows had already fallen, the young had already bled, and the castle, though defended, bore the scars of delayed action. In the end, we do not condemn Flitwick, but we do question him. We ask not because we hate, but because we hope. Hope that future Flitwicks, brilliant, kind, timid, will learn that silence in times of evil is a form of consent. That observation without intervention is not neutrality, but retreat. And perhaps in reading these pages, somewhere in the back of our minds, we wonder, if the next war came to Hogwarts, would Flitwick still wait? Or would he finally be the first to cast the spell? Number 27, Dumbledore's Army and Unsafe Training. The room of requirement shimmered into existence with the whispers of those who needed it most. In this case, it welcomed a group of teenage wizards and witches armed with nothing but determination and a growing sense of rebellion. They called themselves Dumbledore's Army. It sounded noble, didn't it? Courageous, righteous. But what if we peeled back the layers of romanticism and asked the difficult question, was this truly a safe or responsible endeavour? It began with noble intent. Dolores Umbridge had smothered Hogwarts under her tyrannical rule, stripping away meaningful magical education and replacing it with dry theory and rigid silence. Students like Hermione Granger saw the danger first. "We need someone to teach us how to defend ourselves properly," she insisted in Order of the Phoenix. "If Umbridge won't, then we'll do it ourselves." And so the secret was born, one that would grow into a rebellion, a symbol of defiance and potentially a disaster waiting to happen. They met in secrecy, far from the prying eyes of teachers and the inquisitorial squad. No adult supervision, no Mediwitch on standby, and no formal training manual. What they had was Harry Potter, a 16-year-old student with impressive instincts, personal experience in battle, and no qualifications. "I've faced him," Harry had said, his voice shaking with the weight of memory. "I know what it's like." That experience earned him the respect of his peers, but it didn't make him invincible or infallible. There's a moment, often overlooked, when Zacharias Smith questions Harry's authority during one of the early meetings.
"Are you actually going to teach us anything, or are we just going to sit around and chat?" Smith demanded. The others groaned, loyal to Harry. But Zacharias had a point. What if Harry had made a mistake while demonstrating a defensive spell? What if Neville, who was just beginning to master Expelliarmus, had misfired into someone's face? Magic is beautiful, yes, but deadly when mishandled. Let's remember that most of the DA members were minors, 4th and 5th years, still growing into their magic. When practicing spells like Stupefy, Petrificus Totalis, or worse, Reducto in a confined room, without the safety nets of wards or shielding spells set up by trained professionals, they were taking enormous risks, and some of them knew it. "This is mad," whispered Lavender Brown during the first session. "What if we get caught or hurt?" The fear was real, but so was the pressure to stay. No one wanted to seem cowardly. The training wasn't theoretical. They cast spells directly at each other, sometimes in rapid succession. Michael Corner once stumbled back during a duel, barely dodging a full-powered impedimenta. Ernie Macmillan accidentally knocked over a suit of armor that the room had provided for target practice. It shattered into shards sharp enough to draw blood. These weren't simple tricks, they were training for war. The idea that no one was ever seriously injured seems more like a miracle than a reflection of good planning. And what of accountability? If something had gone terribly wrong, if someone had ended up permanently hexed, or worse, who would have borne the blame? Hermione had conjured the magical contract that bound the DA to secrecy, a spell that would mark traitors with boils. That's not school-level magic. That's borderline dark. Where did she even learn that? And was she ready to face the consequences if someone had been cursed because of her enchantment? Good intentions can still lead to disaster. Let us not forget the pressure placed on the students to perform. Neville Longbottom, forever trying to live up to others' expectations, pushed himself to the edge in every session. "He's really improving," Harry had said, watching Neville finally land a solid, disarming charm. But at what cost? In one session, Neville collapsed from magical exhaustion. There was no Madame Pomfrey to help him, just a damp cloth from Luna and a conjured cushion to rest on. It could have been much worse. And where was Dumbledore during all this? He knew, he always knew, the man who had eyes everywhere in Hogwarts, who could detect when Harry stepped into a pensive or when a student opened a secret passage. He knew, and he chose to look the other way. When confronted by Fudge about the DA, he didn't deny its existence. "You seem to be laboring under the delusion that I am going to, what is the phrase, come quietly," he said, before vanishing in a blaze of phoenix flames. Noble, perhaps, but also a tacit admission of oversight. Even the very idea of calling themselves Dumbledore's army was reckless. It wasn't just a name, it was a provocation. It suggested the students saw themselves as soldiers. Soldiers in a war they barely understood. It put a target on their backs. When Marietta Edgecombe betrayed them, she did so not out of malice, but fear. "My mum works at the ministry," she cried. "They said people could go to Azkaban for this." She was right. These weren't games. Still, the meetings continued, and so did the risks. During one memorable session, Ginny Weasley accidentally cast Reducto on a dummy target with such force that it exploded, sending debris flying into Anthony Goldstein's arm. "Bloody hell!" he cried, clutching the wound. They patched it up with a quick episky, but what if that hadn't worked? What if it had been someone's face? The spell was destructive enough to blow open the Department of Mysteries later that year. They were playing with fire. The reality is that for every moment of triumph, like when Harry taught them to produce a Patronus, there was an undercurrent of danger. Even the Patronus charm is notoriously advanced. Most adult wizards can't perform it. Yet here was a class full of teenagers attempting it, pushing themselves to their emotional limits. "Expecto Patronum!" echoed in the room as Seamus Finnegan finally managed to produce a silvery blur. He was overjoyed, but the emotional toll was evident. What if someone's wand backfired? Remember Ron's broken wand in Chamber of Secrets? That single malfunction nearly got them both eaten by a giant spider. Wands are not foolproof, and under pressure they can betray even the most skilled user. Imagine that happening in the middle of a chaotic practice session. The room of requirement was magical, but it wasn't invulnerable. No safeguards were put in place to prevent accidents. No adult to cast a shielding charm. Just trust and adrenaline. We admire Harry, Hermione, and Ron, and rightly so, but we must also recognize their youth. They were 15, 16 years old. Students, children, really. And yet they were leading what was, in essence, a guerrilla training camp. The weight of this was enormous. Hermione carried it with a quiet strain. Ron deflected it with humour. Harry internalized it until it exploded in his dreams and fits of rage. "I'm not even sure I'm doing it right," he confessed once, when asked about teaching. "I'm just trying my best." And then came the consequences. When the DA was exposed and Dumbledore vanished, Umbridge seized control with renewed cruelty. Harry was whipped, interrogated, and nearly driven to madness. Cho Chang wept over her friend Marietta's disgrace. And yet, despite the fallout, no formal punishment was ever given to the group. Was this leniency or was it denial? A refusal to acknowledge how close they'd come to tragedy. The danger wasn't just physical, the psychological strain was immense. Imagine Luna Lovegood, already ostracized, now having to hide another secret, another burden. Or Colin Creevey, eager and clumsy, trying desperately to be part of something larger than himself. They carried these secrets in silence, risking expulsion, disgrace, or worse. It bonded them, yes, but trauma can do that too. One must ask, was this Dumbledore's plan all along? To let the students learn rebellion? To let them taste danger so they'd be ready for what was coming? If so, it's a strategy that skirts ethical lines. Using children as pawns, as future soldiers without their full comprehension of the stakes, is a dark echo of the very forces they fought against. There's irony here.
The DA, meant to resist oppression, also carried its own form of pressure. The oath-bound secrecy, the constant fear of discovery, the danger of uncontrolled magic, the weight of being young and unprepared in a world that demanded heroism. Some rose to the occasion, like Neville, like Ginny, but others struggled quietly, anonymously,